Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. You can follow us online at rockstarcfos.com. My name's Jack McCullough, and I'm the founder and president of the CFO Leadership Council. Let's rock. So my guest today is Mala Murthy. Mala is the CFO of Teladoc Health. And as you'll soon see, Mala is one of the more interesting paths to the C-suite that I've come across. Mala, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Thank you, Jack.
Excited to have you. And while I'm a little bit familiar with Teladoc Health, partly because of researching this, why don't you share a little bit about what's going on at Teladoc Health and your background there?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start with Teladoc Health. We are the global leader in virtual whole person care. What we focus on is helping people live their healthiest lives every day. We have more than 83 million members on our platform, and we provide access to the care our members need, whether it be primary care, whether it be taking care of their chronic conditions, mental health, specialty care like joint and back pain, and urgent general medical needs, like if you have a cold, sniffles, etc. So the way we think of ourselves is we take care of the whole person, whether it be physical or mental, because, Jack, health conditions don't exist in a vacuum, right? And our belief and our mission is care shouldn't either. So that's a little bit of what Teladoc does. I have been Teladoc Health CFO since the middle of 2019. Certainly has been a fascinating time for the company. I joined about 9 months before COVID, and it's certainly been an amazing experience for me as the CFO for the company.
It's interesting because you mentioned taking care of the whole person, mental and health. And I think perhaps because of COVID, but certainly since COVID, there's been more respect and more concern with companies for the mental health issues of their employees. So your timing of joining shortly before COVID is really interesting. Did that transform the company in any interesting way?
Yeah, look, I remember vividly the early days of COVID. I think you will relate to this, Jack. It was, we were all coming to grips with it. We as consumers, we as providers, and frankly, we as companies. And for us, it was essentially all three, right? We are essentially a company that is a provider that provides care, and we had our own employees to take care of. And so just think about us having to learn how to operate differently across all of those different facets and dimensions. I still vividly remember those early days in March, April, May of 2020, when our daily visit volume went up 4- or 5-fold in any particular day. And, we had to still operate our platform. I'm proud to say we are one of the very, very few virtual care companies whose platform never went down. We were able to handle the very significant spikes in daily visit volume and be there for our members and be there for our clients. And as time rolled on, just like all other companies, we learned to adapt in different ways, right? I'm sure you have talked to a lot of people about hybrid work. We were all virtual for a bit of time, and then we started becoming more hybrid. We have worked through return to office protocol, the pros and cons of it, and through it all, we continue to provide care. So it's been an interesting experience. The other aspect that I will say to you that COVID certainly has changed is just the overall acceptance of virtual care. Prior to COVID, I would say there was growing acceptance, certainly awareness and acceptance from a consumer standpoint. What COVID changed is it brought in much greater acceptance from a provider, from a physician standpoint, because, as you know, many of the brick and mortar physicians had to close their offices overnight. And so they learned the benefit of providing care virtually. So one of the really great changes in a helpful way of COVID has just been the overall acceptance of virtual care, both from a consumer perspective as well as a physician and provider perspective.
Yeah, I guess necessity is the mother of invention, right? Because the doctors I know, they're extraordinarily committed to their patients, and they weren't just going to say, geez, we're out of luck, I hope things work out for you, and let's get together when this crisis ends, right? I mean, they were going to adapt to technologies and find a way to give care to their patients. And, it had to make sense on both ends too, right? But yeah, there were months you couldn't go to the doctor for non-emergency stuff. So that's just
exactly
the reality.
right. That's exactly right. And, one of the things you picked up on that is so true is mental health, right? Where you have seen such an amazing acceptance of the virtual care modality is in mental health. And if you look at our own company's performance, look at the growth in mental health, whether it be on our direct-to-consumer side. We have a mental health direct-to-consumer business, which goes by the name of BetterHelp. Or whether you look at our mental health on the B2B side, it is the company's performance reflects the acceptance of the virtual care modality.
Interesting. So I want to chat a little about your own background.
Yep.
And I heard you once say that you still feel, and to me this is remarkable given everything that you've accomplished in your career, but you still feel like the little girl who grew up in India to a certain extent. And so what was that like growing up in India? And, maybe you can tell us what brought you to the United States.
Yeah. Look, I grew up in a very, I would say, average middle-class family in India. I grew up in Calcutta. For those who don't know, Calcutta is one of the largest and very densely populated cities in India. I grew up, I would say, in a time where the resources of the city I grew up in were often maxed out. And what that meant is there were many years, believe it or not, Jack, where I did all of my studying without electricity because electricity was scarce because, again, the city was growing so rapidly. It sounds strange if you look at the India of today, which has just grown by leaps and bounds, in the last, I would want to say, 3 decades. What I say this for a reason, while I grew up middle class, where I really had an incredible advantage was the mindset that my parents had. My parents were, I want to say, different from many other of my friends' parents in that they never believed that women, girls were any different from men. And they instilled that in me from a very young age. I grew up knowing that I had no boundaries, virtually no boundaries. I could, if I applied myself, if I worked hard, that I could achieve what I wanted to. And I was sort of aware of that from a very young age. So I did well in school. I studied engineering after a brief 1-month detour in medical school.
Interesting. I do definitely want to get back to you about that a little bit, but forgive the interruption, Mala.
Yeah. And so, I did engineering. I didn't love engineering. I studied computer science and engineering. I didn't love it. And I made the decision to essentially veer into business school, into management, which I did. I finished up engineering, went straight to business school. And then when I was finishing up business school, I was all set to essentially work in a bank, in a multinational bank in India. And I happened to hear that Microsoft was in town. And I literally just went to the hotel that they were interviewing in, presented my resume. They were frankly astonished because they had, Microsoft at that time was interviewing in the IITs all over India. And they had come to Bangalore, to the city I was in, to interview with one of the institutes there, really more from an engineering standpoint. But they were accommodating. They agreed to interview me, and they interviewed me over the course of, I want to say, 2 or 3 days. One of the most interesting, thought-provoking interviews, frankly, I've ever been in. And then lo and behold, I got an offer, and I was one of 29 who was selected from all over India to come to the United States. So that's really the way I first came to the US.
That's amazing story. And it's interesting how many people, even, who've worked, lengthy careers, they still, give credit to the influence of their parents, to the success they've enjoyed. And, it's just remarkable when you know that, we all have limitations, right? But when your parents sort of take them away, that you can be anything that your talent and your work ethic will allow you to be, that just opens up so many possibilities, doesn't it? So
absolutely, it does. Yes.
And it's interesting because you mentioned growing up middle class in India, and I grew up middle class in the United States. But then you mentioned, certain things that middle class in the United States in the 1970s in my child, that meant I had a summer home on Lake Winnisquam in New Hampshire. Probably at that point in time, our countries defined middle class a little bit differently. So
that would be a little bit of a stretch for me.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like it's a joke that, I grew up, my dad was a mason, so, even working class, not middle class. And yet I had a summer home and my parents had 2 cars and stuff like that. But, that's just kind of the reality of the country and the time period that I worked in. But
yeah, I mean, look, it does, right? It does speak to the American dream, right? That's what it was.
One question, Mala, I always like to ask CFOs, what was your first job of any kind, not professional job, but restaurant or something like that? What was the first job you ever did?
Yeah, my first job ever was the summer internship I did after my third year of engineering. You were required to do some kind of an internship as part of the 4-year degree program. And so that was really my first job. And it was a very standard computer science internship. I did coding. I was given a business problem to solve. I mean, if you were to actually ask me what business problem I solved, I don't know that I even remember that. But it was just a very standard coding job.
Oh, cool. Well, you have one of the better first jobs of my guests so far.
Yes.
So cool.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that I found really fascinating about your own professional background is you've worked before working at Teladoc, you worked at American Express and Pepsi.
Yep.
And I'm trying to find the common thread between these three companies, other than that they're all for-profit companies. But what did you learn from those two companies that sort of, is still helpful to you in such a different industry as what you're in now?
Yeah. I would say, Jack, look, PepsiCo, certainly where I spent 17 years, the years I spent there were formative for me from a career shaping perspective. And then when I went over to American Express, and now at Teladoc, I really was able to apply a lot of the learnings I had, gotten at PepsiCo, but I also learned new things in both places, whether it be American Express or Teladoc. So maybe I'll sort of give you a little bit of a deep dive on each. If you think about both PepsiCo and American Express, these are companies that have been around for decades. Whether it be PepsiCo that celebrated 100 years when I was there, and American Express, where very often in town halls and Amex, they will refer to the fact that this is a company that has been around for 165, 170 years. And the reason I mentioned this is there is a lot of pride in the companies. That culture it's a pride of having been around for a long time, of being excellent for a long time. You don't get to survive and grow if you haven't gotten that relentless culture of excellence and growth. And frankly, that is what, from a career standpoint, I grew up with and grew up in. I would also say in PepsiCo, where I did many, many different roles, right? I started at Treasury, corporate Treasury. I did corporate strategy and M&A. I then went to work in one of the businesses as a CFO. Then I came back to do Treasury for a bit. Then I did corporate financial planning and analysis. And then when I went over to American Express, so while most of my roles in PepsiCo were more of the corporate type roles, my entire 7 years in American Express was within the business as the CFO, right? So first on the consumer side, and then I was the CFO for one of the 3 commercially reported segments in American Express. So what I learned is the benefit of just having real diversity of experience, right? So take the risk, get out of your comfort zone, and just go do and try different jobs, because guess what? You won't love every one of them. You'll be good in some, you'll be amazing in some, and you'll be mediocre in some others. But doesn't matter. In all of them, you will just learn. You will hone your craft more and more and more.
I have trouble believing that you're mediocre in anything. I think this is a little modesty here. No? Yeah, I know. I get your point, though. Generally, there's some areas that, boom, you're going to pick right up, and others, exactly. It's just a learning curve, right?
So. Exactly. And then the other thing I would say is PepsiCo, in all of the roles I did, I was just lucky enough to work with leaders who really, really pushed and challenged my thinking skills. How can I frame the problem better? How can I solve the problem better? Am I bringing my absolute analytical and creative best to the problem statements, right? How can I step back and think about the business and my job in a much more strategic way? What is the overarching context of what I'm working with? All of that I learned at PepsiCo. When I went to American Express, what was fascinating is, I was a little bit of a different profile within Amex in one way. A lot of Amex people are there right out of undergrad or business school, right? So they sort of are there in that, they grow up in that company. Financial services tends to do that quite frequently, right? This is a regulated industry. There are people who sort of live, breathe that industry. And I was coming in with no background in financial services, mid-career, right? So I was a little bit different. And there was, what I realized when I joined them is the best way for me to establish credibility was to say from the outset, look, I don't know. I'm here to learn, and I'm here to contribute. There are things that I have learned in a company, in a different company that has driven excellence for a long time. And I have learned skills that I can bring to bear. I just don't know the business. And what I did is the first, I want to say 3 to 6 months, I went around with people who are known to be experts in different functional areas, and I would set up time with them and say, just teach me. I don't know. I'm humble enough to admit it, and I want to learn. And there are two things that happen through that. The first is, I have to tell you, people were so generous in giving me time, right? They were just, it was just generosity on their part. And the second is, I think people realize that my style was, as a leader, was to just learn from, be humble, roll up my sleeves, learn from the ground up, if you will. Because what I have recognized is the truly good CFOs are ones who are able to influence the business, but do it in an informed way. Informed meaning they actually know the ins and outs of the business, right? They're not coming in at like the super galactic level and talking about strategy and this and that without understanding, frankly, how the watch works. And that's what I did at American Express, and I was able to demonstrate that. The other thing that Amex taught me was how to be an inspiring people leader. What's fascinating is in Amex, for any job that you want to hire for in your group, people, it's a bit of a marketplace of talent, right? People actually want to work for you, right? You have to have the reputation of a good people leader. And again, I was a relative unknown. People didn't know what I was like because I hadn't been there for a while. And so I really had to establish my chops, if you will.
You're almost like building a personal brand within the company, right? So
great way of putting that. I had to build my brand. And so that was what I learned to do at American Express. I fast forward to Teladoc Health, and what I would say is the CFO I am at Teladoc Health, no surprise to you, is I am the product of all of my collective experience that I have gained across Microsoft, Sun Microsystems, PepsiCo, American Express. And I will tell you, consciously or unconsciously, I am flexing all of the muscles I have learned and gained every day in my job at Teladoc Health.
It's interesting. And a question that I get asked a lot from my members, they'll actually take themselves out of a role because it's not an industry that they know.
Yep.
I've always worked in tech. I don't know that I can succeed in life sciences or, whatever it might be. So yep. I'd actually, how should I answer them? In the old days, the CFO could work at any company because it was sort of a back office job. You just reporting what happened after. Now it's strategic front lines making a difference, which makes transitions between industries in some senses harder. But, what advice, if you or me, could you share with people who are thinking, hey, this is a great opportunity?
Yeah. I think it's a really good question, and it's something I have done 4 times, right? I started off in tech, then CPG, then financial services, and now healthcare. And here's what I would say. Look, the first thing is just be very good at your craft, right? The CEO of PepsiCo had this quote. She always used to say, know what your hip pocket strength is. Have a hip pocket strength and know what it is. And I would say to you, I think it is important to invest in your career and yourself upfront to have a hip pocket strength, right? To know it, to cultivate it, to invest in it, to grow it upfront in your career. A second thing I would say is, I think it is wonderful to move around different industries because they will force you to have a growth mindset, even if you don't have one. What do I mean by that? You have to show and have grit. because there will be days that will be really hard. There will be days when, frankly, I felt like I knew nothing. What am I doing here? How am I ever going to be able to grow that, deliver shareholder value, help grow the business, make it more profitable, get to the right capital allocation decisions? And I would say, I think being in different businesses does really teach you to adapt, right? To have grit and adapt to different vernacular, adapt to different culture, adapt to different people, learn just the stated and the unstated, very importantly, the unstated things about different companies' cultures. And I think that grows you as an individual. It grows you as a professional, but importantly, it actually grows you as a human being, as a person. And I think that there is a lot of fun in that. The last thing I would say is be prepared to just, again, it's, what I've said, just have the openness and the courage to say, I don't know, and I want to learn. And I think if you are able to do that and are open-minded to do that, I think you will have an amazing experience if you try different industries.
It's interesting because I spoke to a very prominent PE investor, and I joke now, people who know me know exactly who it is because I know precisely one prominent PE investor. But what he shared, the question was a simple one, what are the big traits you're looking for now with CFOs? And you just touched upon two of the three.
Yeah.
He listed inspiring both trust and confidence. Yeah. And then he mentioned adaptability and resiliency. And it seems like the second and third are the ones that you mentioned. It seems like those are critical things, particularly for a CFO shifting industries.
It absolutely is. And I think it also is, Jack, when you are going to a different company as a CFO, it is really important to lean on your skills, your strengths, to be able to help frame, shape, and articulate very clearly the strategy of the business. Because again, remember, my job is to be thinking ahead, far ahead, as much as it is to focus on the in-quarter, the balance of year, make sure I'm guiding investors the right way. I am maniacally focused on how do I and my team drive insights, drive the right decisions to deliver both short-term and long-term value, both. Right. And I have always said this, I think finance usually has a unique ability to do that because we sit in the middle of a lot of different things, a lot of different functions, a lot of different decisions. So, done right, we should have the ability to do what I said, right? Shape the strategy, help shape the strategy, help drive decisions both in the near term and the longer term. And exactly like you just said, I think you can do that if you have the resiliency, if you have the open-mindedness, and again, if you have the clarity of thinking.
It's interesting. I think that's the first time I've ever heard a CFO use the term maniacally to describe himself or herself. So for the record, that doesn't mean like a maniac. So
no, yes.
At least in this context. So.
I don't have horns on my head. I'm very normal.
Yeah, I'm glad we clarified that since this is an audio experience for people. So, but that was great, and you mentioned sort of working cross-functionally, and I think one of the things about the modern CFO job is, other than probably the president and I guess you could argue whoever the top human resources officer is in a company, you have the most cross-functional job in the company. Right?
Yep.
So, and you're on a par with those other two, and so sort of talking about the CFO role broadly, you've been a financial executive for 20 years. And in your view, how has the nature of financial leadership changed during those 20 years? And more importantly, where do you see it headed in the next few?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Look, I think that there are there used to be, and I would say even today, there are different flavors of CFOs, right? And one can choose depending on the context of the company and what is needed to, again, drive value for the company. One can choose to play the CFO role in different ways. What do I mean by that? There are CFO jobs that are slightly more reporting heavy, right? Reporting focused. That is one way of being a CFO. The other way of being a CFO at the other end of the spectrum is you really are the right hand to the CEO, right? You are essentially in many ways, co-thinking, co-leading the business with the CFO, with the CEO. And then there is the spectrum in between, right? Where you choose to play in that spectrum. Obviously, I would say it is, for me personally, it has always been more fun to play on the end of the spectrum where I'm essentially working very, very closely with my business partner, whether it be the president of the segment where I was while I was at American Express, or now with my CEO, again, thinking about where is the business now and where does it need to be years from now? And how are we going to get from here to there? What matters? What's important? What should we invest in? What are the things we need to change about our operating model? And what that means essentially, Jack, is really, I would say, being a CFO in the today and in the future is about having a broad perspective about the business, right? Yes, certainly there are days where I am focusing on one aspect of my function or my skill set more than the other, and I flex different muscles to different extents on different days. You know, the weeks I spend before in earnings release, and you can relate to this, are very different from, let's say, the weeks I would spend before, you know, we are doing our annual strategy review with the board, for example, right? So we all know that. I just think that a good CFO is someone who understands the business from a broad strategic perspective, has a good eye and ear for what is happening external to the business. That is worth understanding, learning, you know, paying attention to, because you know it's going to have an impact on our business. And so, you know, spending time thinking about the externalities as well as what is going on internally. I think that is increasingly what a CFO is, you know, a great thought partner.
It's interesting because I agree that is kind of the modern CFO role, but it's interesting. There are still some out there clinging to the more traditional role. And in fact, probably early 2021, when there's a lot of supply chain disruptions and whatnot, that came up at one of our meetings. It's like, so what are you doing in your role as a CFO to sort of manage inventory and working capital now that it's so much more difficult than it was 2 years ago? And there was one fella in particular, good guy, but he kind of kept saying that wasn't really his purview. All he really needed to do was to present accurate financial statements and do the best job he could with forecasting. It's like, that's not really a value add position in the modern business community. I don't think a lot of companies want a CFO with that skill set and that type of mindset, do they?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that I hire strong leaders on my team who are able to, you know, sort of pay attention and focus to something like what you referenced. And that allows me, you know, the leaders I have and how good they are, frankly, allows me to be able to step back and think more broadly about the business. And again, I would say there are days when I will be zooming in on something with them because that is the need of the hour or the day of the week or the week. And the last thing I was going to say is, you know, more broadly, thematically across all the the questions you have asked, Jack, what I would emphasize is I do think my job as a leader, as a CFO and as a leader for the company, I do think it is my responsibility to have a great bench, right? One of the things I remember, I joined Teladoc in the middle of 2019, and I remember sitting with Jason, my CEO, I want to say maybe a couple of months after I started, and I said to him, I want to start building my bench. And I still vividly remember this conversation. And he was he said half jokingly, he said, wait, you just got here. And I said, yes. And I do think if I were to win the lottery someday, you have a nice pick of who is going to be my backbone, my bench. And I do think that is true for the CFO as it is true for every other leader in a company, in a business.
Oh yeah, succession planning, right? We're not going to be here forever. So, and in fact, you even have mentioned the importance of hiring smart people.
Yep.
And, in fact, you even look for people who are smarter than you.
Yes.
That's easy for me to do. I can pick people at random, and there's a really good chance they'll be smarter than I am. But for you, that's probably a little bit more challenging. How do you find these people?
You find them essentially, look, part of being in places like in the companies that you work is you develop associations, relationships, friendships along the way with people who you have been able to assess in, pressure cooker environments, in great moments, in less than great moments. And so you are able to rely on your network, right? Whether you recruit them back to, let's say, the next place you've moved on, or they know of good people who they are willing to speak for. So there is value in just building a network of people that you are able to rely on. The other thing I would say also is when you are hiring people and you want to hire good people, I do think it's really important to spend the time thinking really clearly about the role that you expect them to play. So I don't mean the job description. It's really more as you're assessing candidates through the interview process. I do think it's important to think about the context that you are bringing them into. Who are their critical stakeholders? Making sure that those stakeholders actually have a role to play in their hiring. They own the decision as much as you do. And that way, then you are going to be able to set up good candidates for success.
That makes a lot of sense. So one thing that is also come up, you refer to staying power in your career, and I'd like to dig into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
From where you sit as a CFO, how are you defining staying power?
Yeah, I would say staying power to me is, again, it is sort of the resilience and grit that you demonstrate through the many different types of roles or industries or companies that you are going to be at. And I would say to you, how you cultivate and grow that staying power is really, it's a very personal choice of how you go about doing that, right? Definitely your experiences growing up have a huge role to play in that, right? I've already shared my experiences growing up. That certainly taught me all about perseverance. The other thing I will tell you that really shapes staying power and I think is really important for people is frankly having failures. I have had many failures over the course of my career. My initial experience, my first corporate experience in the US was not a success by any means. And so I learned, even now, many years later, there are still things that I took away from that experience that have shaped who I am. There are certainly leaders who I have worked with along the way, some who I had a great relationship with, and others who, frankly, was less optimal. And as difficult as those experiences were for me, I learned from it. I have taken away things from both the good and, much more importantly, the not so good that have developed my staying power and resilience.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's one of the strengths of the American economy and others that, rely on innovation is failure is not viewed necessarily as a horrible thing. If you try and you fail, as long as you're learning from it and don't repeat those mistakes, it's not cast upon. But there are certain countries where, failure is considered exactly that. It's not that it's a learning opportunity, it's that you failed. And I've heard from people, Google doesn't have that high of a batting average, but, they reward people for taking risks. And every time they fail, which apparently is, as often as a lot of other companies, they learn something from that experience and they move on. So
exactly. I think it's about taking informed risks, right? Making sure that you know how to take informed risks, that you're asking the right questions. And there is an advantage to failing and failing fast and learning from it and moving on and applying those learnings going forward.
Interesting stuff, because, I say, just reward people for taking risks within the company, right? Not crazy risks, of course, right? We're finance and accounting people, to say the least, but yeah, encourage a culture that just encourages that sort of thing. So I want to chat a little bit about mentoring. And almost every successful executive I know had a mentor or multiple mentors early in their career. And a lot of cases that the person didn't even know that that's the role they were fulfilling for us. But have you had any mentors that made a big difference?
Look, it's a really good question. And yes, I have. And what's interesting about those experiences, Jack, is a very long time ago, someone who I respect enormously told me, mentorship is not you are not told to be a mentor. The best mentors or the best mentorship experiences are where the mentor actually chose to be a mentor to someone, right? It was not a sort of structured program. It happened very organically, very sort of informally, if you will. And that certainly happened to me, right? And I understand the benefit of that. I will also say it's not possible for mentorships to always happen organically. And so I think it's really important to also have structured mentorship programs, which I have also been a part of. And frankly, I have enjoyed as much. And I think the benefit of mentorship, again, is, if mentor and mentee come to the experience prepared, it actually can be a really powerful experience for both.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the secret is that each party has to be vested in the other's success. So
exactly.
Now, I know you mentor several young professionals, and again, there might be some you don't even know that they perceive you as somewhat of a mentor, and that's just the reality. But I already know what your best advice to mentors is, and that's declare your ambition. And can you share what you mean by this?
Yeah. So I have had the benefit of, being part of a number of women's groups, both at PepsiCo and in American Express. And at Teladoc Health, we have a number of remarkable employee networks. We call them business resource groups, one of which is a women's group, and I am one of the executive sponsors of the women's group. And what I have shared with them is I have found in the course of my career, and by the way, this applies to me too, I do think that I found it hard to declare my ambition, to put it out there, to state it plainly and unambiguously. And I do think that doing so does two things. One, it clarifies for me, clarifies for you what is it you are aspiring to be? And second, I think it clarifies for your company, for your leaders, what it is that you expect. Now, what I've also shared is I do think one needs to be reasonable, realistic. And I do think you have to be prepared to be patient about it and, demonstrate the grit, the competence, the work ethic, the leadership, the inspiration to be able to go get it. It's both.
Interesting. That I think that is powerful advice. So I want to switch things up a little bit. You're actually on the board of a company called Avantor.
Yes.
They are a global provider, very large company of mission critical products that serve the healthcare industry. So there's sort of a natural tie-in, I think, to what you're doing right now. But a lot of our members and the listeners always want to get board opportunities. And there's certainly more now than ever for CFOs. But how'd you come across this position? They're not exactly posted on job boards. So how'd you get the position, and any advice you can share?
Yeah. So this position happened to be through a recruiter. What I will say is, look, if you are interested in board positions, first of all, I think make sure that you have the diversity of experiences to be able to be attractive for board roles. Because one thing I have truly enjoyed my time being on a board. It is a very different experience, and I have learned a ton. I think that being a board member calls upon sort of having a diversity of experience, right? Because even though I have been in finance, when I'm a board member, I am looking at the business, right? I'm looking to, I'm looking to opine on the business. So I think having a diversity of experiences really matters for board roles. And then the second thing I would say is leverage your network. There are people, there are leaders who I am sure you would have worked with who are on boards. And it is absolutely okay to use that, leverage your leaders, and leverage the network to look at board positions. There are, frankly, boutique search firms who do nothing but board searches. I have been reached out to by some of them. And so there are different ways you can actually approach the board search. And I do think it's important to have a breadth and depth of experience.
It's interesting. So you mentioned that you've learned a lot from being on a board. What are the types of things that you learn as a board member that you can actually bring back to make you more effective in your role as a CFO?
Yeah, absolutely. When you are on the management team, on a leadership team of a company versus the board, there is this really important line between governance and leadership and management, right? So I am in a board capacity, I am on the governance side. I'm thinking about, look, what are the risks? Where does I'm certainly listening to the management of the company talking about how are they going to grow top line, bottom line. I'm also uniquely tuned into, okay, where are the opportunities for them to grow more? What are the challenges and what are the risks? Ultimately, though, you are looking at the management team to bring in they're there for the reason they are, right? To run the company. So it's fascinating for me to be on both sides, because when I am, doing my CFO job and now interacting with my board, it has certainly made me more effective in having, I want to say, much more constructive conversations with my board, our audit committee, in terms of what is our role from a management perspective, where we should go make the decisions we need to make. And certainly there are times when, I will see our board and our audit committee sort of pushing, and I am able to say, no, wait a minute, this is something that is a management decision, not necessarily something that the audit committee or the board needs to necessarily directly drive, right? So that is a perspective that I have learned so much of since I have been a board member, since I've been on the board of Avantor.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Well, I'm on one board. It's not a board of director, but I'm on an advisory board. And I think I drive the poor CFO nuts with the questions. But, you probably have to hold back a little bit, given everything that you've accomplished. I wasn't even that good of a CFO, but given everything you've accomplished as a CFO, you probably have to hold back and make sure that, your advice to the CFO is going to be taken the way you intended, right? Not just to come and say, hey, you stink at your job, listen to me.
Yeah, I think certainly, and I think it also means cultivating a relationship with the CFO such that there's a foundation of trust.
Makes
right?
sense.
I'm not there to come in over the top and do a performance evaluation. Like, that is not my job.
No, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not that bad, but like the reality is the CFO is more accomplished as a CFO than I was. So I'm doing my job. My job is not to coach her up in any meaningful way. So, but I want to chat. You have a lot going on in your life. You're CFO of a very visible company. You're on a board. I also know you're married with a daughter, and challenging to balance all of those things. So do you have any advice for working parents to, sort of find that balance? And before we begin, what's your daughter's name?
Her name is Ria.
Ria, okay.
Yeah. Look, people have asked me this a lot of times over the years, and I'd say the following, Jack. I don't know that I have any magic answers. I don't know that I have any wisdom different from what I'm sure you've heard many people say. What I know has worked for me is the realization when my daughter was about 3 years old, that I wasn't going to be able to do it all. Okay. And I had to make the decision that for example, I wasn't going to be there at every school event. And I had to decide which ones I was going to be at, make a commitment to her that I was going to be at those, and never, ever miss those. Now, there were many events that, frankly, I wasn't at, and it was not easy. So I did the best I could in terms of making a commitment to her that I knew I would be able to keep. That was my way of juggling, right? Work, priorities, as well as life. But these are very personal decisions, and they will inevitably result in trade-offs, and they are never easy. I don't know that you can have it all.
Yeah, in the modern world, it's very difficult. Even when both parents are committed to it, it's just so hard. So, but I think our kids are going to turn out great, though. So, if we miss the occasional event, we miss the occasional event, right? So
you are absolutely right. I think I have an incredibly thoughtful daughter, and I'm really proud of the young woman she is. So
how old is Ria today?
She is now 23.
Okay, so is she in school? Is she at the start of her career?
She's officially off my payroll and gainfully employed, I might say.
I got to tell you, that's a CFO only thing. My children are off my payroll. So, well,
that's funny.
Good for you. Yeah, it is. It is funny how often that comes up amongst my community, but I know it's important. A busy person, all work and no play. I understand you're a rather serious runner.
I don't know about serious, but as I said, I got into running when my daughter was a baby, and it was my way of me time. It was my really only me time. I'd actually never run prior to that. So it started as that. And I have never stopped since. So I run 6 days a week, short runs and long runs. And it truly has continued to be the time when I am investing in myself, in my health. I'm reflecting on the past week. I'm reflecting on the week or weeks coming up, whether it be the family things I need to do, the work things I need to do. It's really me time.
Yeah, that's important. Well, you're sort of putting me to shame because 6 days a week. It's not like I don't work out, but I'm more on the 6 days a month schedule, unfortunately, at this point. But you always look for excuses. But you must be, I mean, if you've been doing that for 20 years, 6 days a week, if you run marathons or half marathons or?
No, I do it really. I haven't done marathons. I just do it for myself. I do it for myself. I do it to take care of my both physical health and mental health.
Yep, they're both, you can't have one without the other, as Frank Sinatra wrote so many years ago.
Exactly,
so cool.
Right.
Well, I'd love to sort of end with a fun fact, or
yes,
is there something about you that people would find surprising about you?
Well, I don't know about surprising. So I trained for many years when I was growing up as an Indian classical musician.
Okay, wow. So
and I studied for how many years? I want to say 14 years, 15 years. And I do believe that doing that has trained me. When you train as a singer, as a musician, there are just things you learn. You learn the benefit of practice. You learn the benefit of just, being at it every day, getting slightly better and better every day. And those are the things I learned.
Interesting that you're a classical musician. And I have observed, and you did start your career on the science side of things, but
yes.
I know a lot of engineers, and it feels like 1 out of 4 engineers I know are in a part-time band on the weekend. I don't know if there's something about is it the right side of the brain that would be bad or something? But
the funniest thing is when I sing at home, occasionally my husband and daughter will be like, stop, no more singing. So it's like, apparently all the skills I learned have withered away, but I did learn, I did training for a number of years.
Yeah. The only thing that prevents me from being a professional singer is lack of talent. But it's funny because I have a normal talking voice, at least I think I do, but I'm such a bad singer that people are convinced I'm bad to be funny, and I'm not. I just can't sing for some reason, so can't hold a note. So cool. Well, anyway, this has been really a great interview. You've had such an amazing journey in your career.
Thank you. I appreciate Jack.
Grateful for you to share your thoughts. I know you're really busy, so I'll give you any final words you might have.
No, listen, I appreciate the time you have invested in asking all the thoughtful questions. Carolyn, thank you for helping us and me prepare. And that's about it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.